Everybody see my screen? Can you see my screen? Somebody just give me a heads up. Okay. So we're going to go right into this. I'm hoping my voice hangs out. Um, so this one's going to be overview of the application process. So this is going to be a little bit different. Again, same thing. Kind of sit back, absorb this. There's a lot in here. You're going to hear this, as Melissa just said, repeated. It's going to take a while for it to all click in because there's so many things. I'm just going to kind of give you an idea that when I was doing the presentation, there were some of these application processes I kind of forgot how to do, not how to do that they existed because basically we don't usually use a lot of some of them. So like when I get to there, I'll explain to you what I'm talking about, but it's a nice overview. So what I'm going to do, start out here, we're going to talk about the agenda. So the uses of the FAFSA, and again, the FAFSA is the free application for federal student aid. The FAFSA filing options, because there's more than one, completing the FAFSA on the web, FAFSA processing and changes, because a FAFSA, just when it goes in, there's several reasons that can be changed. So uses of the FAFSA, if you want to look at it this way, there is a couple different reasons that you're going to file. Obviously, parents are going to say, I want to see what I'm eligible for. But the biggest thing is the FAFSA is going to come in, and like I was talking about, they kind of come in and hover when they're looking at a FAFSA form, and they look at what's going on in the household. So they're looking at income, assets, number of family members, number in college. Then the Department of Ed will come up and say, okay, we've calculated this magical number called an EFC, an expected family contribution. We feel this is what the family can contribute towards their education. Been in this for a long time, and I'm still waiting for that magical day when somebody comes in and goes, hey, that EFC is exactly what I expected. You're not going to get that. You're going to get the families who their eyes bug out and they go, they're crazy. That is way higher than I thought. That's when you come in as a financial aid person to calm them down, because basically you want to look at it like an index. And I think eventually they're talking about changing it to student aid index. So it doesn't sound like, hey, you're going to write a check for this. But the expected family contribution is basically looking at income, assets, number of family members, number in college, saying that this is what you can contribute towards the education. The other thing is it's going to confirm uses of FAFSA uses. It's going to confirm there's criteria. So there's what they call database matches. So when the FAFSA goes through, it doesn't just go to the Department of Ed and that's it. There's some other checks that go through to see if like a student is are they a US citizen? Is their social security number right? And we're going to go through and actually look at some of those things that are looked at from the FAFSA. Keep in mind with the EFC, what is stamped usually stays unless there's something that on that FAFSA is either incorrect or needs updated, something like that. Again, it is a snapshot of the household, and eventually you're going to hear about how when families are filling this out, maybe mom has remarried, and there's a stepdad, but stepdad says, hey, I don't contribute. Stepdad's still in the family situation. Remember, when you're trying to explain that to a family of who's in that household and why, I always use the analogy. It's like the department comes in, they're snapshotting what's going on in that household at that time. So that's probably a pretty good way of trying to talk to families about this is when they collect it and how they collect it. What I would suggest right out of the gate, and I know I'm still a paper person, I'm going to date myself, but I still have the paper FAFSA sitting at my desk. And the reason I do that is some of those questions can change from year to year. And if you get that phone call, you can look it up and go, okay, this is what they're saying. So it's an easier way to just to try to basically explain that to the parent and say, hey, this is the question, this is what they're asking, not how you're interpreting it. It's up to the family if they want to make copies or not. That's totally, I mean, we're in a stage where we're kind of going paperless, but I like to do that and I like to make my notes on things. So like I said, if you have some way of keeping notes for yourself, because it's going to help you out a little bit. The FAFSA also determines estimated financial eligibility. So uses of FAFSA, some schools will use supplemental forms. Now keep in mind, supplemental forms, if a student is selected for verification, what this means is a student files a FAFSA, And you roughly about 1/3 of all applicants are going to be selected by the Department of Ed. And they're going to say, well, let me put it this way. I always say to parents, it's like winning the lottery without the perks. The school gets to double check information. The student gets to submit different information. So basically, we're just double checking all the information on the FAFSA. Some schools will use supplemental information to see if they need additional information. Keep in mind, you cannot hold federal aid back for supplemental information. You can't use, so if they're eligible for a Pell and they're not selected for verification, do not hold that Pell for institutional aid. That's a big no-no. Now, if the student's selected for verification, that's a supplemental form. So yeah, you can hold it for that until you get everything resolved. But there are 2 points on that slide that are very important. Verification, basically, just so you know, it's to resolve any conflicting data that may be on the FAFSA. So if the Department of Ed selects, you have to complete verification. If you as a financial aid person, you're sitting down with a family and you see something that looks odd and you think, that doesn't look right, you can in-house select them. So sometimes we'll see something that goes through the Department of Ed. It could be that the student and the parent both reported they made $100,000. Well, an 18-year-old generally doesn't make $100,000. So we say, let's select you for verification so we can take care of this. Or there may be something that they talk about with you and there's conflicting data going, no, that doesn't look right. Anytime you have conflicting data, it is your obligation to make sure that you fix it, correct it, or make sure that you account for it. So remember, conflicting data, that's something you have to resolve one way or the other. So you're kind of like the financial aid police in that. So that's one of those things that you can't go, yeah, I see it, but I'm not going to do anything about it. That's not where your job is, just so you know. Okay, then we're going to go on to filing options for the FAFSA. So there's multiple ones. So with the FAFSA and with the Department of Ed, there's always multiple ways of doing things. So we're going to start doing the application process right out of the top. So again, there's 5 different things that you can do to get a FAFSA filed. I have a slide for each and every one of these. Some of them, you're going to be right on it. Other ones, you're going to be like, I'll probably never use that. And that's okay. It's just as long as you can get that FAFSA done. So the first thing before I even start talking about the FAFSA, let's look at the real first step. It's what they call an FSA ID. And what an FSA ID is, it's your federal student aid identification. So I always like to simplify everything. I say what an FSA ID is, it's your electronic signature. So when you're filing a FAFSA, the student and the parent, if you're doing this online, there's got to be a way to sign this saying, yes, this is true and correct to the best of my knowledge. An FSA ID, if you equate it to going to an ATM and you have to put your password in to get your money, kind of the same way, but you're just signing online. We're in an electronic world and that's how we do it. Student and parents both need one if they're putting information on there. And what I tell families, when they're first starting to come in, even if they're a sophomore, junior, or senior in high school, just get it over with and get it done, put it in a safe spot, keyword, put it in their key phrase, put it in a safe spot. And then when it comes time to do the FAFSA, or if they're signing up for loans, anything like that, they have it. But truly the first step is not really the FAFSA, it's the FSA ID. You can fill it out, but then you have to wait to get it anyway. So let's look at the different types of ways to file the FAFSA. Most common, it's going to be FAFSA on the web. And what that means is you can go out onto the Department of Ed's website and you can fill this in online. It's at studentaid.gov. You want to become very familiar with studentaid.gov. A couple of years ago, I think that people have been in aid for a while will tell you, there was like a website for every single thing with the Department of Ed. So this has been a really, really nice change that they now have everything on one site. So studentaid.gov, you can apply for FAFSA, you can do your loan information. Eventually you're gonna be able to pay your loans off on this site. It's a basically start to finish. They've really done a nice job pulling everything together. So if you have not ever seen this site, I would highly recommend get on there and play with it. And also make your students aware of it if they're not already. So this allows for, FAFSA on the web allows for real-time online submission of the FAFSA, whether it's the first time somebody is applying or if a student's a sophomore, junior, senior, or grad student, and they need to renew the FAFSA, because remember, you have to reapply for the FAFSA every single year. If a student makes an error and they may need to make a correction, they can make the correction on here. It offers the instructions. So when you're going through a question, if you're not sure, there's a little help key that students can go in and get more information. And this is the nice part of this way of doing this. They offer skip logic. And basically what this means is this: if the question doesn't pertain to a student, it's not even going to show up on the electronic form. Paper form is going to have everything on it, skip logic. They get to skip stuff that doesn't pertain to them. It makes it a little faster. And this is a nice way to get students and families onto doing this, to say, you know what, those questions won't even come up. This will make it faster. So it's kind of a little nice hint for your family so they know how to do this and do it quickly. The electronic FAFSA on the web worksheet, this is a little different because remember, this is the worksheet. These are available in English and Spanish. And the one thing I would say is to go online and print them, just one. So that way you can show, basically it's a show and tell when you have families coming in. That you can say, look, you can do the FAFSA on the web worksheet. So that way you can kind of prepare yourself for the questions. We have students who, the student speaks English, but maybe the parent doesn't. So it's nice to be able to hand that to the parent and say, same thing. You know, that gets you acclimated to it. This helps the filer complete the application online. So it's basically your cheat sheet. It's getting everything ready. I know, like I said, a lot of families like to do everything on paper, and they make their notes and everything, and they put everything in a file. This is for those paper people. This is a great way to do it. The one thing you want to remember, the FAFSA on the web worksheet, and it's right on the top here, you do not mail that. That is just the cheat sheet. So you don't mail this in. This is only to be used to basically get everything ready to go. And I did forget something about the FAFSA on the web. There's a question that will ask if you want to use the IRS data retrieval tool. Just so you know what this is, and if you start doing verifications in your office, you will want to promote this. There's a way that a student can actually say, yes, I want to use the IRS data retrieval tool. Parent and student can use it. And basically what it does is it pulls the information from the IRS onto the student aid report. It increases accuracy, and it can change when you're doing verification, which we're going to talk about on Thursday. Basically, if it pulls it directly from the department, or excuse me, from the IRS's website, you know it's already there and it's correct. So that's something that you may want to talk about too if you're doing high school nights. Okay, the electronics My Student Aid mobile app, and this is an interesting one. This is one I don't know if people will still promote it, not promote it, how they feel about it. This basically means you can file your FAFSA on your phone. I think it works pretty well for a student on there. For me, I would have a hard time looking at the questions on my phone. So this all gets into, do you want to do this on your computer? Or do you want to do this on your phone? There's the mobile app. You can download it through the App Store for an iPhone or Google Play for Android users. So you can get this on your phone and you can do it this way. This is kind of a nice way to remind students, if you're doing a high school night, to say, hey, you know what? Why don't you, if you're interested in doing this, why don't you go out and pull the app down now? Because maybe they won't use it, but then they'll look and say, why is that app on my phone? Oh, I have to file my FAFSA form. So it's kind of a reminder too, to do that. And then they can also, you know, because the Department of Ed's going to send reminders and things, but this is totally how you want to do this. I think when they started, they thought this was going to be a nice little thing for families sitting around watching TV and saying, hey, let's do the FAFSA, let's do this together. And it was kind of going to be a family situation how to get this done. I don't know, like talking to my students, I think they basically still get onto the desktop and parents over the shoulder, and they're doing everything online. So this just becomes, do you want to do it that way or not? The FAA access to CPS online. What that means, FAA, that's you, Financial Aid Administrator. See, we talk in acronyms. CPS, Central Processing System, that's basically the Department of Ed. So what this means is, being a financial aid person, you can actually fill out a FAFSA form for a student so you can submit the application on the applicant's behalf. I don't know how many schools do this. I'm sure some schools, if they're doing it a lot, or they're not doing it a whole lot. I can speak for Pitt. We're probably not going to do this a whole heck of a lot just because we're too big. We've got too many students to do that. But there are some reasons you may want to do that. If a student comes in, they don't have access to the internet, there's something they just can't do it. You can help them out. The school has to be obviously registered with the Department of Ed to do this. And keep in mind, when a student is filing the FAFSA, they have to put a school code on that FAFSA before the school's going to see anything. So keep that in mind when you're talking to students about filing. Make sure your school code's on there. Every year we have somebody who files a FAFSA form. They remember to hit all the deadlines, but they don't list the school code, so their information hangs in limbo. Here comes the paper FAFSA. This is the old version, as I would like to call it. But this is also, as I said, I have one in my office. And the reason being is basically all questions are on there. It's 10 pages long. Every question that's on the FAFSA is going to be on that form. So remember I was saying, if somebody's doing the form online, there's skip logic, they may not get to that question. But if somebody calls you up and they're like, hey, I'm halfway through this application, I'm stuck on this question, can you help me? The numbers may not be in the same sequence, but usually when you look at this long enough, you're gonna know right where it's at and then you can answer the question. Keep in mind, those questions on the FAFSA do change a little bit too. So what you say one year, saying, yes, this is counted as untaxed, next year it may not be. So you wanna make sure that you at least, look at it every time they come out, just peruse through it real quick. You can request files, or excuse me, the FAFSA. So if you want to have some online or some available in your office, you can. You can print them off. They do color code them every year. So it's this lime green this year. Some years they're a little bit prettier than that, but they will color code them so you know which year is correct. But it is 10 pages long. So it is long, but a lot of that, when you look at it, it's going to be the directions and things. So when you look at it, don't get too in the weeds with, oh my gosh, this thing is long. It's really not that long. If you have never filed a FAFSA, the one thing that I would highly recommend, pull out a paper FAFSA form and fill it out. Because that way you know what your families are going through, you know what your students are going through, and you know what the questions are going to be on the form. So that way, if you read it and you're going, I'm not really sure of that question, this is your time. Get to your people network and say, hey, I don't understand this question on the FAFSA. Why would they ask that? We can help you out with it. Again, like I would say, I always have one at your desk. And the other thing is with the paper FAFSA, they're fine to do. But keep in mind, if you do the FAFSA on the web electronically, it's about 2 weeks, probably shorter than that. I always just do 2 weeks because I know it's usually not that long. The FAFSA, that could take 4 weeks. And corrections, almost as long. So if you're looking to do something really quickly, you want to say, go online. Most places are going to go online. Everybody's going to push you to the online thing. But you will have those parents that just want to do things by paper. I mean, you're going to find them. They feel more comfortable with them. Just let them know the process is going to be slower. This is the one I completely forgot about because it's very rare that we use it. It's the FAFSA on the phone. And this is basically, it's intended for the applicants with limited or no internet access, but they're facing deadlines. So every year you're going to have the student, you're going to send all these notices out in October. Hey, don't forget to file your FAFSA, time to do your FAFSA. And they're not going to do it. They're going to come in and go, hey, I'm a Pennsylvania resident. I need to meet that FIA grant deadline, of May 1st. This is a way around it. You can actually you can file it. I mean, they're going to be up against, the deadlines, but if they need to do something ASAP, they can actually call in their information. The number's right here, 1-800-4FED-AID, but basically they can do their information over the phone. So this is like the quick and dirty on that one. I don't think that we maybe use this maybe once every 5 years. I mean, it's got to be a pretty big deal before that we would probably use it in our office. But just remember though, that's out there, just in case you have that student who something happened and they just didn't file. Usually they forget, but there are cases where something tragic's happened to the student and you really want to try to help them. This is the way to do it so they can meet their deadlines. The FAFSA demo, basically it's a training tool for financial aid professionals. So their website is listed on here and you can kind of run through on the FAFSA. So this is something that, like I said, you want to pull out the paper version, you want to do the demo, whichever one you're most comfortable with. You want to do both, it doesn't matter. But that's something that I would probably recommend that you do. Just because the more you look at this, the more information that you get and the more things start to click with you, the more comfortable you're going to be. Renewal reminders, eligible applicants who have given a valid email address, they're going to receive an email reminder. So this is around October 1, probably a little bit before that. Every October 1st, the FAFSA comes out. Students will forget to do this. One of the most missed times with FAFSA, if you think about it, is usually between the freshman and sophomore year. If you think of a freshman family, look what they're going through. They're doing the college visits. They're getting their award notifications. They're picking a school. They're doing the tours. They're buying their things for their dorm. They're moving into their dorm. They're not even halfway through their first semester, and it's time to apply for financial aid again. So all this stuff is going on. They don't even have, they're probably around midterms. And guess what? It's time to reapply. They always seem to forget at this point. We've sent reminders out. The other thing is, once they're in school, we're sending those reminders to the students and generally not to the parents, depending on the school. Maybe your schools will do that. But if you can do something as a school, they will get a reminder. But if you can do something as a school, you may want to do that. The reason I stress that can be a difference if a student returns or not. If they forget to reapply and they miss the state grant deadline, they could still get their federal, but they could miss their campus-based SEOG money. They could miss FIA grant money if they miss deadlines. So this is one of those things that, yes, the Department of Ed's going to remind. Don't rely on that. Remind as a school as well. Remind those students. The FSAID we talked about. This is kind of at the end of the presentation, but I put it at the beginning. Remember, the FSAID is what I call the electronic signature. It's so you can complete the form and you're basically signing the FAFSA, you're signing the loan applications. So this is something that's it's a pretty big deal. I would say make this number one step. And you apply at fsaid.ed.gov. We send postcards out to students telling them to do this. That just parent and student can get it over with. It's done. They put it in a safe spot and they can go ahead with filing all their FAFSAs and things. Something you should remind, and I don't know how many have ever had a student who is under the age of 13 apply to school. I'm sure there's got to be someone, but keep in mind that the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act, you can't have a student apply online under the age of 13. They're going to be forced into doing the paper FAFSA and they're going to get a paper student aid report. The student aid report is basically when you file a FAFSA form, you're going to get some type of acknowledgement telling you what you put on that FAFSA form. So if you do run into that situation, it's pretty rare, that I just want to make sure that you're aware of. If you have somebody who is under 13, you can't do anything electronically. So this is a little survey they have that basically just says, you can just, in the chat, you could do yes or no. Do you think having this many filing options is useful to a student or a parent, or is it just way confusing? So if you wanted to put that in the chat, unfortunately, I can't see my chat. So Grace or Melissa, I'm going to let you see what everybody says.
I got a smiley from Jenny. Lots of smileys, it looks like.
Oh, well, it's smiling. I'm going to take that as confusing.
No, that means they think it's okay.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
So I want to make sure I interpret that right.
Yeah.
Okay.
One person, Katrina, you said you don't think it's a good idea. Do you want to? You were the only one. Do you want to tell us why you think no?
I think the FAFSA itself is confusing. Like the
Oh,
questions they ask when you go through and help a student with the FAFSA, I think they make it more complicated than it needs to be.
well, you know what? Let me just tell you
I,
this. It's they've had so many rewrites. Am I on mute? Oh, okay. Like one year they'll try to say, if your parents live together and this, then the next year they'll say, if your parents live in separate households. I mean, they try to every year it seems like with a lot of these questions, they try to reword them to make them more simple, and just financial aid's not simple. But I think you're right. The FAFSA can be really overwhelming for some families. One of the things that always um, amuses me, I guess is the right word, is when I do verification, because like in addition to R2T4, I am the verification queen on my campus. If you want to ever go for that title, it's a wonderful one, right, Jenny? I think you are on your campus as well. No, not yet. Okay. Anyways, with they people don't know their household, or when they go to do the verification worksheet, they only list like the parents and themselves. They forget all the siblings. So I can't tell you how many times, unless I know the people and I'm like, are you sure you lost a lot of people out of your household? That there just seems to be confusion surrounding that. So the FAFSA, it just is not a one size fits all. And we're going to be seeing some changes coming down the pike to the FAFSA in the next several years, based on the information I sent you. So thank you. I appreciate that alternate view.
I think it's just because for us, we're doing a lot of professional judgments right now due to COVID. So I think the confusion and the anxiety and the stress has just been so much more than it's been in the past. I mean, the amount of professional judgments and the amount of FAFSAs that we've received that are just incorrect because people are not really doing, they're like, okay, well, 2019, that doesn't represent me now, so I'm going to put in different information. That's the issue that we're seeing now.
Yeah, it's a good one. Okay, Janet, sorry we didn't mean to interrupt there.
No, that's good. I like that because I agree with you. It's like, hey, it's what's happening now, but 2 years ago, give me your tax return. So it's very confusing. With the multiple types, I mean, I think that if you get somebody acclimated to FAFSA on the web at the beginning, then they're going to follow suit. Like parents like to, once they establish one route, they like to do that. So if you can get them on doing FAFSA on the web for 4 years, you're probably going to do it. So that way they're not all over the place, unless they forget, and then you're calling it in. So that could be the one-off on there. Completing FAFSA on the web, there is a worksheet on here. Just so you know, on here, this does not have all the information that's going to be on the FAFSA, but this is kind of a good set of questions on this whole thing. So that way the student and the family become familiar with what they're filing. We get the question all the time with citizenship. And basically when they're filling this out, a lot of times we have to walk the student through to say, are you a citizen or not? Because we have a lot of students who are from different countries. So this helps them on this form, just pulling this little question out and helping them go from there. And sometimes they can file, sometimes they can't. Students' marital status, we want to make sure that we get this corrected. The selective service, that's something that's going to be an edit check. So we want to make sure the students, they know this. And then the high school questions, basically, I think that's for statistical purposes. But, basically, it's one of those things that it doesn't have all the questions. These are the questions that are on this section. And it's basically a good way for you to familiarize yourself with the questions that are being asked. And like Melissa made a good point, they change every year. So when we're looking at the different sections here, section 2 is a biggie because these are going to determine if the student is independent or dependent. And you usually get those students whose family will come in and say, well, I don't claim my son or daughter in the tax return, so they're automatically independent now. They don't live with me, they're independent. That doesn't cut it. So with a student who thinks they're independent, you may want to sit them down, or if you're meeting with them, and go over these questions. This is what makes a student independent. And you'll even get to the point where there's gray areas that they still you may have to do an independency override on them. So basically, and it used to be years ago, there was 4 questions, that was it. And now that there's a few more on here. So basically we're looking is the student at least 24? Are they married? Are they going to be working on a either a graduate program or a PhD program? This is a question that, Melissa, I'm glad you said about how they reworded things. This question used to say, are you a graduate student? And the number of students who would say, yes, I'm a graduate, because they graduated from high school. They weren't a graduate in a master's program. And what would happen is once a student is done with their bachelor's, they pretty much cut off the grants. So you'd have to go back, and students were basically cutting themselves off the grants because they forgot to answer, or they didn't answer that question correctly. They're looking as a student, a veteran. Are they serving in the, are they in active duty? So these are the questions. Do they support their children? Now, this is another question that can hang you up a little bit, because if you have, basically the question, I now have, or will have children from whom I perform, or I can talk today, will provide more than half of their support between July 2021 and June 2022. This is a question you really want to look at too. If you have a student who's 18 or 19 years old who has a child, keep in mind they're saying that they are supporting at least 50%. So if they're living with mom and dad or the grandparents, and the grandparents are really supporting, that student's not supporting that child 50%. So that's not going to make them automatically independent. That's a question we may get. Student may want to answer yes to that, but that does not make them automatically independent, because they're not supporting that child more than 50%. The grandparents are. There's some other questions here, and I'll let you read them. They're about
Janet, I think one of the ones here in Pennsylvania, I know that we see a lot also, is folks in the National Guard saying that they're veterans and have done active duty. We find that most National Guard young people are not veterans. The only way they would be a veteran is if they're called up for like an emergency purpose, like Katrina or something. So that's another really big one to watch on here.
I'm glad you said that. Thank you.
Yeah.
So the other ones here, basically, there are some different ways that a student can be independent. You want to read through these, especially with guardianship, if they're homeless or at risk of that. For time wise, I'm not going to go through all of those questions on there.
No, but Janet, I don't know, are you going to mention, because I won't say anything if you're going to say something, but some schools treat a lot of those dependency questions that they verify them. Other schools let them ride. Are you going to mention anything on like that for the independent cuz?
No, go ahead. Go ahead with
Okay.
that.
I was just going to say some schools do different things with some of these questions, especially like the I'm in foster care, I'm homeless or at risk of being homeless. I know at our campus, we have what we call independent cuz, and that's just kind of the name we call it. But where students we find that more than 90% of these answers are wrong. So we actually put a hold and we require confirmation of that status before we move forward. So if you say you're homeless, then I need a copy of that paperwork from your high school. Or if you say you're in foster care, I say we need a copy of that, because we find that probably 99% of those students do not answer that question correctly. Now, many of them will end up making independent, because we see a lot of people that are actually in custody, but custody is not the same as guardianship. So you can, when a student submits paperwork to say they're in custody because they indicate guardianship, that's not the same thing. You actually have to go back and do a PJ. And that gets a little bit more than we want to do here. But suffice to say, you want to check with your school's policies on how you handle, confirming these, or if you do more with a certain subset of people and things of that nature.
Thank you, Melissa, because that's one of those things when we were talking about how you want to look at your school policies. That's one of those things that I know Melissa checks a little bit more than we do. So that's just the way that the school policies are written, and they can be written from branch campuses. We're both branch campuses. So that's a really good point. So thank you for that. To continue on here with completing FAFSA on the web, The parent section, if you've noticed this too, did you notice that the screen turned purple with the wording? They will color code these on here, just so when it's a parent's filing, it's one of those recognition things, so they don't get hung up on filing putting the wrong information in, because that does happen, especially the parents filling out the form. That's one of those ones I caution parents when you're filling out the name, the date of birth, and then the parent gets gung-ho on that, and then they put the parent social security number in for the student, and then that becomes a big, it's a harder thing to correct. So that's one of those, make sure that the parents and students basically note that they're on the right section here. Parent information is completed only if the student is dependent. Remember, when we went back, what's a student dependent? If they check yes to one of those, they could be independent. But chances are, for somebody coming out of high school, majority of your students are probably going to be dependent. You want to determine who's the parent. Not everybody has the same definition of parent. We have students who maybe biological mom and dad are in the picture, and the grandparents have raised the student, and they look at the grandparents as mom and dad. You can't put grandparent information down here unless they were legally adopted, but yet their definition of parent is my grandma and grandpa raised me, and that's my mom and dad. Well, really, technically, it's not. So you want to be careful on who looks at a parent. If it's,
And hey, Janet, just so you know, it's like actually right in the directions, because we've had a couple of people do this where it says, do not list your grandparent, aunt, uncle. I mean, it's specific. So if you guys, that's a good one to remember. If you have a family, it's right in the FAFSA.
right. And we get into that too with, you want to look at who's the biological parent, if there's step parents in there. And we get into, like we're looking at, again, the FAFSA is a snapshot of what's going on in that household. So if biological mom is remarried to stepdad, just because stepdad says he's not contributing, doesn't mean he doesn't get listed there. So we want to make sure that we have the correct family number, the number of family members in there. So make sure the definition, that the students know that, like Melissa said, the definition clearly states who a parent is. And you want to be careful too. I'm just going to kind of toss this in here, where there may be mom and dad were married, they had a student, or had the student, they divorce, they're both remarried, and then they get together and go, you make less than I do, so I'm going to put it on mom's information instead of dad. It's not let's make a deal. What they do is they look at who is supporting the student, at least 50%. You will get the question over and over again, well, we have joint custody, it's 50-50. The way I do that, I say, well, there's 365 days in the year. That's an odd number, so there's got to be a tiebreaker. Somebody has lived in that household, even if it's one day more. But sometimes parents want you to make that decision, and it's not up to you to make the decision. It's up to them. It's who supports that student more than 50%. And usually support, you're looking at food, clothing, shelter. So that's what you're looking at. It's not who's claiming them on the tax return and things like that. The other thing is to remember the IRS data retrieval tool, or their self-reported income. Remember, we talked about what the IRS data retrieval tool is. It's where there's a question when you're doing this electronically, you can pop it up and say, yes, I want the information to be taken from the IRS and basically stamped onto the FAFSA. That way, basically adjusted gross income, exemptions, taxes paid, there's certain line items that will come right over from the IRS and go right onto that form. Makes it easier, makes it more accurate. Not everybody will be able to do that. We'll talk about that later this week. But if a student and family can use it, I would highly recommend it. It's gonna make your life easier too.
And theirs, if they have to do verification, less they have to submit.
Right, because if verification, they have to submit a verification worksheet, 1040s, some schools require W-2s. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff that they have to submit, and then we get to double check everything. So I always say it's like winning the lottery without the perks, because they get to submit stuff and we get to double check it. So just think about it like that. Means tested federal benefits, and basically they're looking to see some things they're going to count against the student, some things they may not have to. They're going to ask for other untaxed income. So everything that's on the tax return, there may be other information the FAFSA is going to want to look at. And I always say with this one, if there's anything that's like something that's off, keep a copy of the form, because it does, so you don't have to go back and look for it. Section 4, this is the student's financial information. Again, remember that was purple, this goes back to gray. So that should tell the student who's filling out the form in case they're doing them together or the parents doing this for the student. The student's going to report taxable and non-taxable income. They too can use the IRS data retrieval tool, or they can write in their own tax information. IRS data retrieval tool, like I said, I would just say use it. It just gets to the point where you're telling the families, just use it because it's going to make life easier. Same thing, means tested federal benefits, and then there's other untaxed, or excuse me, other income, sorry, not taxable income, other income. Signing the FAFSA on the web. This is basically the student can use the electronic FSA ID, which is that when they sign up for it, they get that little, like I said, it's like going to the ATM, it's like you're using your PIN number. If a student does not have an FSA ID, they can print a copy of the FAFSA on the web and they can sign and use a signature page and send it in. Just remember, it's going to take a little extra time.
Yes, Janet, because they actually, when you don't sign your FAFSA, they hold the FAFSA for 2 weeks. So it doesn't like automatically come into your mailbox as a rejected ICER. So in these kind of circumstances, you have to be aware. Family may say, hey, we weren't able to sign it. And you're like, oh, that's okay. We can send you a our cert. We'll get it taken care of for you. But keep in mind that it's just hanging out there at CPS for 2 weeks before it comes to you as a rejected ICER if they fail to sign it.
So it's just like if you're looking for somebody who forgot to file, that's even going to slow it down more. So
right.
This is when speed is your friend on there. And if you don't have, and Melissa just said, if you don't have the signatures on there, you're going to get a rejected ICER. What that's going to mean is you'll get if you get the information, there's no EFC on it. You can't use it. It's invalid. So the biggest thing, just remind parents and students, you have to sign it. One of the things we see about signing is the student will fill out the form, they'll send it in, they forget to put their parents' information, or vice versa, parents filling it out for the student. One of the things I would highly recommend when you're talking to families about filing the FAFSA is to say, do this as a family unit if you can, because parents often file the FAFSA form without the student anywhere around. And we kind of, I guess they were called the helicopter parents, now the bulldozer parents. And I like the puppy. And what it does is basically with the FAFSA, it's like everybody should be knowing what's going on with that. Even we have students who, after 4 years, they get out and we tell them what their loan debt is, and they're shocked. And they don't know because their families have done this for them. They're being helpful, but in the long run, are they really being helpful? Because now they don't know what's going on. Now it's like, oh, mom did this, now I have this debt and I don't know what to do with it, and I wasn't anticipating it. So if you go from this is kind of like early intervention. If you can get the family together and say, hey, let's do this as you need to know what's going on. I need to know what's going on. The other thing is, this is why you'll like this too, if you can get the family part together. If you're a campus that has dorms and the student comes in the office and says, hey, I have a question, and they have it written down on a little note because mom told them to come in and ask the question, student may have no idea what they're even asking about. So the nice thing is, if they do this as a family unit, hey, when I filled out the FAFSA form, remember this question, this came up. So the more everybody's on the same page, the easier everybody's life's going to be. Will everybody do it? No. But if you can start, like I said, early intervention, get everybody involved in it.
And Janet, one of the things there that the FAFSA people have done is, redacted the parents' information. So a lot of parents used to not want their kids to know what they made and stuff like that. And so now they can't see their parents' information. So even more reason to share, you know what I mean? Because it's not like the kid's going to see your information, but have them be involved. Great point. Thank you.
No, that's a great point, because part about redacted, because that is something you want to be careful, like what you tell students and parents. Because there is that weird little switch where they go from matriculated student, what you can share with a parent. I mean, I'm going to use grades as an example. They're going to talk about that later. Once you're a student, you can't, and you get somebody's parent calls up in December and says, hey, how'd my student do? You can't tell them unless there's release on file.
Yeah, that
So
FERPA release is so important. And I have actually had a situation where a spouse called in and was like, what was my spouse's AGI? And I'm like, I'm really sorry, you're not on the FERPA. I can't share information with you. In situations like this, you could be going through a divorce. And he's like, yeah, we are. And I'm like, case in point, you know, so
it's like
got
you
to be,
always have to cover yourself.
yep.
I have a question.
In times where you wouldn't think you had to, but you don't. So I'm glad you said that.
I have a question.
Mhm.
Where would you find that release? Because I know that I've heard that where I can't tell parents certain information because there's not a release signed, but I don't, where would you find that?
It's usually at your registrar's office. In most schools, the registrar's office houses that FERPA, and it's FERPA is Family Education Rights and Privacies Act. You should have stuff on your website about that, because I mean that's big, like that's huge. You can talk to a student all day long, parents, grandparents, anybody that calls in up to the first day of class. After the first day of classes, boom, windows shut, no FERPA, no nada. People get PO'd. What do you mean you don't want to talk to me? I'm paying this kid's balance. And you're like, hey, we'll have Jimmy Joe or Sally Sue get right online, complete that form, and we can call you back. So yeah, that's a big one, Rachel. So thank you for asking. Check with your registrar's office is all your student services offices should be familiar with it, but do most schools, just shake heads, have it in your registrar's office? Don't know. Yeah, if you're not sure, check with your registrar. Good place to start. If nothing else, we got FERPA mentioned today. There you go.
There you go. I'm sure it'll come up through the week too, right?
Yeah, it's a big one.
Okay, hold on. Okay, the next thing is submitting and completing FAFSA on the web. So this is kind of like the vocabulary lesson on here, because remember I was talking about when you file a FAFSA form, students have to put a school code on their FAFSA. And what happens, students can file and they don't put a school code in there, it hangs in limbo, doesn't go anywhere. School codes, really what they're looking at is the student saying, I give you permission to access my information. That's what the school code, that it kind of directs that FAFSA information to the school to process aid. There will be students who will forget to put that on there. There are students who will put the wrong school code in. It's easy for us to do that because we have a med school, law school, regular school. So we have multiple school codes. So that's another layer in itself. But say that student has filed, they're one of those students who list a million schools on their FAFSA, because you can list multiple schools. But then if they do a tour and they fall in love with your school and they say, you know what, I want to come to your school. The student can come out and make a correction and add that school code, but you can also add it as well. There is what they call a DRN. It stands for data release number. And what the data release number is, it's basically like another code that's saying, when when a financial aid person is on CPS, they can pull that DRN number in and you're giving them, you can see the information off that FAFSA. So then you can actually get a hold of it to package. So that's where the DRN number is. If you ever have a student who says, I list you as a school choice or the school code's wrong or something. On here too, there's an estimated financial, expected family contribution. So I think that if they ever change that name, I'll be very happy, instead of saying estimated expected family contribution, because that sounds so redundant. But basically it gives you an idea what the EFC is. Remember, that's the number that they calculate from the information on the FAFSA. It'll give you, tell you what's going to happen next. And it's also going to give you the IRS and school information that's listed on here. Now, when we were started the process, we talked about how the FAFSA collects information to determine the EFC and things like that. But we also talked about when the FAFSA is filed, there's certain database matches that the FAFSA will go through. And this is kind of an interesting visual here because it does travel. The information travels, so that way we can make sure it's most correct, basically. So when we have the little things here, these are some of the things that the edits go through. So think of the FAFSAs in the middle, green circle, and all these little arrows are going to different organizations to make sure things are right. So for example, the FAFSA, they're look for the Social Security Administration. So we're going to have a little thing coming up, the slide next to get to kind of match things up here. DHS is going to be the Department of Homeland Security. We have selective service. So if a student is going to be 18, they can check on the FAFSA they want to be registered. If they aren't registered, we're going to know they're not registered. We have students who maybe never register. And then what happens is after the age of, say they're 27, 28, 29 years old, they've never registered, we can't give them financial aid unless they have a really, really good reason why they didn't register. But that's something that's a requirement, so they do double check that. NSLDS, that's the National Student Loan Data System. This is going to be the history of all the loans that a student had. So say that a student was in school 4 years ago, they borrowed loans, but they never paid them back. They just totally blew them off. Okay, so they defaulted on their loan. We can't give them federal aid. So it's going to go through that check. The DoD is the Department of Defense, VA, Veterans, and then Department of Justice. So there are some edit checks that go through there. Now, if something comes up and it says there's something that fails through these edit checks, you're going to get a list on a student aid report that's going to say it's a C code. C code basically means check it out. That's something that's conflicting data, and you have to resolve it before you can pay that student federal funds. So if a student's in default and we see that, we have to work with that student to make sure they can get out of default before we can give them aid. So those are just kind of some ideas on there, but this next slide is kind of interesting. This is something that kind of helps you put it into perspective of what goes where. So for example, let's look at the Social Security Administration and then look at the column to the right, the items checked. So basically you're picking which column goes where. So if you're at the Social Security Administration, let's go right down to the third thing here, valid SS, master death file, and US citizenship. So they're going through and checking certain criteria to make sure that the student's information is correct. The Department of Homeland Security, B, if you look at that, they're going to check to see is the student eligible non-citizen status. So they're going to be checking those kind of things. And some of these may be easy to resolve and some of them not so easy. So that's the one thing that, like a default, if it pops up in default that the student has already taken care of it, then there's documentation that the student can submit so they can get themselves back in good standing. Some other ones, they may not be as easy to resolve. And when you run into those situations, this is why it's so important to network, because usually we've had some of these, but there are still some that just totally stop me in my tracks. So
well, like that Department of Justice one, which is the suspension or termination of eligibility for federal benefits due to drug offenses. I think there's like 6 people in that folder, and they're all basically from, by the 1980s when there was, the big cocaine scandals and everything like that. So, I mean, some of them they still have, but I've never seen some of these. Most of them I've seen, but not that one.
Yeah, so I was going to say, and some of them you may see by the time, next year, 2 years, whatever runs around, some of these could disappear. So, or they could add. So that's one of those things they update. So basically, I'm just going to run through and kind of give you the answers. Social Security Administration, that's going to go down, like I said, the third one, valid SS number. B, Department of Homeland Security. That's going to be eligible non-citizen status, so they would be checking that. Selective service for C. Second one here, registered with the selective service. So they check that. So if a student says they're registered, but they're really not, they're going to check it. You can also go out to this selective service website and actually look someone up, if the student's there, because you're going to need your social number. to see if they're updated or registered, I'm sorry. The National Student Loan Data System, D, that's going to be the second to the last one. Are they in default like we talked about? There are times that a student can borrow too much or receive too much in funding, and they may not be eligible. So you have to take a look at that. Department of Defense, which is up here, and E is the very last one. Death of parent or guardian as a result of military service. So that's that Iraq or Afghanistan grant that we were talking about there. F, Department of Veterans Affairs, veteran status. That was probably the easiest one on there. And then Melissa was talking about Department of Justice hold file, which is G, and that's the very top one here. So that's kind of an interesting little visual. I mean, I think this is kind of one of those things that just gives you an idea that the FAFSA just doesn't go to the Department of Ed. There's edit checks there. And the biggest takeaway on there is when the student aid report comes back, you will have comments that you have to see. And if there's a C code on there, we'll talk about that later on, you have to resolve the C code before you can pay a student federal aid. So usually it's not just, hey, they're eligible, I can give them a Pell Grant. You have to make sure that all the checks and balances are correct. The FAFSA processing of a student aid report, the student can be emailed, they can receive a paper. So CPS is sending this as an email, paper SAR, and paper acknowledgement. So there, even though there's different ways to file a FAFSA, there's also different ways to receive your notification. Email notification, again, if there's a valid email address is provided on the FAFSA, you'll get the electronic student aid report. Remember, we talk in acronyms, SAR, student aid report, you're gonna hear that over and over again. So that's one that you might wanna become familiar with. This also provides access to electronic STAR, again, student aid report. This is basically what it looks like. It's gonna have the information that's on that you filed on the FAFSA form. And it gives you some other details that are on there as well. I know this is a big one, but when students receive this information, you want to tell them you read that. I say that tongue in cheek because you're going to find out students don't read anything. You'll get that one that you love for 4 years that reads everything. But students have a tendency not to read a lot of things. So that's one of those things that you want to just kind of promote that. Make sure you read that. Make sure there's deadline. Some of this stuff is has deadline on it. Sometimes it's date sensitive, things like that. A paper, if you file it by paper, you're going to get a paper FAFSA. And if they don't have an email address. So basically it's that tangible. And a lot of parents and students like to hold on to that. It's our acknowledgement. If the electronic application is filed without providing an email address, and sometimes that happens, the student's going to basically have a different format. So basically the takeaway here is there are going to be different formats the way you filed the application, how you're notified. Student can review the data, but they can't use this to make changes. So if they find that there's something that's on that this form that needs updated, they can't use this one to change it. Now they can go out electronically and make a change. The ICER, this is basically what the school receives. So basically student aid report, it's what the student gets, and ICER, this is what the school gets. So it's the institutional student information record. So I feel like when I'm doing this, it's a big vocabulary lesson. There's no test on this one at the end, I don't think, right, Melissa?
Right.
We are really bad with acronyms. So if there's something that I say that's not on here, just stop me. The central processing system sends results to the school. So this is how we get the information. It includes those comment codes and those flags that I was talking about. So if somebody's in default or somebody didn't register for the selective service, this is how you get that information, and a signature page if needed. Now there's a thing to here, and this goes back into, we're going to go into basically another vocabulary lesson. There's 3 things that we want to talk about, and they're basically the 3 things on a student aid report. There are corrections, there's updates, and there's adjustments. So just so you know the difference for them. The correction are the changes to incorrect data that the student must be made by the student or parent or financial aid administrator. So the big takeaway there is changes to incorrect data that was originally put on that FAFSA form. Then there's updates. So this is different. Updates required when the applicant data is corrected at the time the FAFSA was put in, but it changed. So I was trying to think of an example of this, and the example I come up with is family fills out a FAFSA form. For the family, the report to in school was correct at the time, but right before school starts, one of the siblings says, "Oh, I'm not going to school." So what they do is that's going to be basically we've selected for verification as well, but that's something that's updated. It was correct at the time. They had all intention of going, but then they didn't. So you have to update the correct information, and that's something I ran through verification too, just so I have the information on hand. But remember, there's a change correction. It's incorrect at the time. Update, it was correct, but now something has changed. With updates, that could be, like I was saying, household size, number in college. That's an example. You can do, that's under verification. But then dependency status, that can change. And you can update that throughout the year. Dependency status, sometimes that changes if there's something pretty drastic, maybe death of a parent, and the student now goes from dependent to independent. So that could be changed throughout the year. And these are the examples: household size, number in college, changed through verification. That's an update. And dependency status all year. Adjustments. That's when a financial aid administrator can exercise professional judgment. And I know somebody had mentioned they were doing a lot of professional judgments this year. I think all of us across the board are in, well, what we so pleasantly say PJ Health. I think that's on your campus, but with COVID, this is one of those things that has really kind of changed the way that we're working in the office. So I think probably a lot of you guys were working from home, and then you got inundated with the number of families who called to say, "Hey, I lost my job, something changed." An adjustment, just so you know, a financial aid person. So the families can't do that. We can do that. We can change what's on that FAFSA, but here's the biggest advice I have. Make sure your I's are dotted, your T's are crossed. And you can explain this. Now, I tell like my staff, if you're doing a PJ, you're making a change like this. This is what I want you to do. I want you to put your auditor hat on, walk through that. And then here's the other thing. In 2 years from now, did you create a trail of all the changes you made that you can easily explain to somebody? So just because you understand it doesn't mean somebody coming in behind you understands it. So even if it sounds like, no, they should know that, don't assume. Make sure it's clear, it's concise. You can open it up and somebody can read it like a book. This is why I changed it. So
you know what, Janet, can I interject just real quickly? Because I wrote a note down here that, and you kind of hit it right on the head. Comments are so important. Like that's going to be like one, documenting and reconciling are probably two of the most important parts of what you're going to be doing in financial aid. And the documenting is, I can't even tell you how important it is, because other areas will thank you for good documentation. Now, you do need to be smart about what you put in written comments on your campus. Like I wouldn't name call, or, there's always abbreviations, PETA, if you don't know what that is, let me know. But you need to keep your comments clean, but you do need to be detailed, because I'm telling you, people will thank you when you're able to say, no, we spoke to the student and we told him all this stuff when the university is about to get sued or something of that nature. So financial aid seems to be the biggest area with the most documenting skills, but this is a talent that should you decide to change careers at some point, is something that you would take with you. That is just very, very, very important. I just can't even stress how important that is. So even if, and I know my staff sometimes get a little overwhelmed with comments, like during an orientation or something, trying to get them all in, but put them on a piece of paper. You can always put them in later, but those comments that you make will save you or somebody else's life in many instances. Off my soapbox.
Nope, you're good. I'm glad you said that, Melissa, because you know what, even other offices will thank you, but you're going to thank yourself as well. Because you will have those situations where, say it's an orientation or something where you have one person after another in your office, you make a comment, this is what I told the family, and you move on. And then 2 weeks later, that person comes back, and you're not going to remember who they are, and you're going to say, well, you said, well, no, I would never say that. Well, yeah, you, and then so you look back and go, wait, I documented it. This is what I said. Or if you're in an office where you have multiple people working, one of the big things that we have was a student will come in and say, I was told this. Well, who were you told that by? Well, I was told by a woman. Okay, that's 1 of 10. You know, so it's sometimes it'll be easier if you have your name on there and say, this is what I told the family. And sometimes it can be just a misunderstanding. Oh, they interpreted this differently. So yeah, I'm gonna actually jump on Melissa's soapbox and say, yes, documenting it is gonna save you 10 times over. It also helps you when they call and then you go, this person, what should I remember? And then you read it, and go, oh, now I remember.
Well, this is also a skill you just take into your regular life. You know, my husband has learned this from me, you know, and he's gotten really good at when he calls the VA, who did you talk to and what time did you talk to them? And what was just the general gist of your conversation? Because when somebody calls in, like Janet said, well, I spoke to someone, narrow it down for me, you know? So yeah, just can't even say it enough, but thank you.
Can I
No,
add one small thing
course.
as well? A piece of advice. If you have a general financial aid email box, which I know a lot of institutions have a general email account that students can email, a practice that we've implemented that has been really helpful is when you reply to that student, if you're the one in the inbox that day answering questions, reply with your name. You know, when you reply to that email, because when the student replies back, you may not be the one who's replying again in response to that second email that comes in. And it's really helpful for the students to get familiar with the names of the people in your office. And also so they know who they're interacting with if they're interacting in the general email box. So if your institution's not using your names in your general email box, that would be something I would suggest implementing, which is very helpful.
Great, thank you. Those are especially important at a bigger office. Exactly. Very important, thank you.
And we do the thing when we have like orientations or something, we're bigger office, so not everybody is in on those days. We split them up. And that way, one of the things that we do is we have like almost like a generic business card that has our office information. But one of the office processes we do is if you're handing that out, you have to put your personal business card with it. And you'll have people who they will latch onto you before they're in school, and you'll have them all the way up to the point. I get students who are now working on their PhDs. That's totally fine with me. When you make those relationships and you can walk them through those bumps, it's going to make your life a lot easier. You're going to feel like, oh no, they're here all the time. But you know what? You're going to get to the point where they're going to follow directions way more than a student who's just getting somebody different all the time. So yeah, I can't agree. Sign your emails, just become personal with them. And it makes you kind of rebrand your office too, because people are always afraid of financial aid. So they think we're all mean, craggy people, and we're not. We're fun. But to continue with the PJ, I just want to kind of run through dependency status override. Like I said, we have these, and you know, it's unfortunate, but sometimes parents pass away in the school year. There are situations where it's not safe for a student to be in their household, and you may have to do a dependency status override. So you want to be a little careful on that one. That could be a student gets in a fight with their family and they're saying, you know what, my mom and dad kicked me out, they won't do anything. You still have to document that. So, you know, we have cases where a student will come in and they've shown us a police report. It's not safe for them to be in that environment. There might be a third party. Well, usually we have to have somebody else who's a third party, maybe, you know, a priest or a therapist or somebody who can say that that's, you know, there's something going on that is above and beyond that student's control. So we will look at the dependency status overrides to make sure that we've helped that student out. Now you will have the student who wants to be independent because they think they're going to get more money. That doesn't necessarily happen. So with FIA, they're going to run them through a whole new set of criteria, and they may not get it. With the school, they may get it, but they may end up getting more loans. So it all depends.
Yeah,
Data-
and back in the day, Janet, just again, as a little bit of history, we used to be able to make students independent if they claimed themselves on their own tax return, or if they'd been independent for 2 years, or any of those kind of things. But I mean, they've actually closed the door on that. And if you look in the handbook, it specifically states that it's usually abuse or abandonment kind of issues that we make students independent on, and that specifically supporting yourself or not being claimed by your parents are not sufficient reasons to make somebody independent in and of themselves. So again, a good place to check is your handbook if you're delving into that.
And again, document that to the hilt. I mean, just make sure it's documented. So I mean, that's just one of those things that in 2 years, and you forget what you do, or you forget what that student, if somebody asked you why you did it, make sure you have a clear, concise path done. Data elements affecting the EFC, that could be, job loss. I think all you guys that are working on PJ, the number of people who have lost jobs, their adjusted gross income has changed. They reported 2018 or 19, and now suddenly it's a whole different ballgame. And every school does this differently. We've had a lot of them, and what we do is we have the student will call up and say, my mom or dad lost the job, and we have an estimator that will run everything through. And the reason we do that is because sometimes if a student calls up and they say, this is a horrible thing, my dad lost their job, and it's a difference of $1,000. We're not going to run them through a professional judgment and put them all the way through that, because it's not going to change the EFC. In the other case, it may change the EFC drastically. So definitely, we're going to make sure that they're familiar with that. Other things that could change the EFC could be loss of untaxed income. So a student who turns 18 and loses child support, that could change things. Some schools are different on what they will look at with professional judgment. For example, some schools will look at tuition for a high school for like the siblings, and they'll count that, and other schools will say, absolutely not, and we're not going to do that. I was pretty staunch on, nope, I won't consider it under any circumstances. A couple of years ago, I had a student who they pulled out of a public school. The parents pulled out of public school. They had them go to the nearest, the closest private school and paid tuition. I thought, well, that's a choice. But then as you got deeper into it, the student was bullied severely. And in that case, that's when I looked and said, well, I got to look at the bigger picture on that. So it's one of those things, don't get to the point where you're just uber focused on one thing. Sometimes there are going to be situations where you look and say, okay, that's a whole different situation. I'm going to have to change the way I think. So those things can happen too. But the other thing is, make sure you have that in your policy and procedure. So with financial or professional judgment, basically it's your judgment. The Department of Ed really isn't supposed to be able to question you on that, but they technically can. So I would, again, make sure you have everything documented. Cost of attendance, you can change a little bit. You want to be careful with that, but usually I'll give you an example here. When we change cost of attendance, we do everything on averages, but sometimes if a student has a class that's higher, you can increase the cost of attendance that way. We have, and I think a lot of schools do, if you go between 12 and 18 credits, you charge one flat rate between 12 and 18. So if a student is, the average is 15, but the student's taking 18, or they have more costs, we can increase those. Again, document anything you change on that. Because if you're questioned on it, you're gonna have to explain it. So not to scare you on that one. I've gotten my hand slapped on that. It's one of those, oh, I forgot to write that on there. You're good, it's gonna happen. People make mistakes in financial aid. Most things can be corrected, but the object of the game is document it and try to be as 100% as you can correct. See if there's anything I forgot on PJs, because I don't want to run out of time, but I don't want to skip anything either. FAFSA changes, again, let's go back to the middle is the CPS. So when you make a change, there's going to be an email notification where you're going to paper SAR, where you're going to paper acknowledgement. Remember, you're changing with NSLDS, there's the financial aid, the FAA, that's us. Remember, that's always you. And then the student. So who's changing it? And then where it goes out and how you're notified on here. Here's one of the things, this is kind of one of those questions at the end, the wrap ups on here. How does your school encourage students to apply for federal, state, and institutional financial aid? I kind of like this question on here because this is one of those things, I think everybody does things differently. But this may be one of those networking questions. Is there a way to hit everybody, to capture everything? Because this is one of those questions we may want to work with, because with us, and I think Melissa said it, is admissions is kind of sometimes competitive. You don't want to put things out. Financial aid, we want to throw the blanket as far out there as possible and say, hey, you know what? We want to hit everybody, apply, get everything out. I mean, we've tried everything from postcards to putting them on our TVs to sidewalk chalk to everything there. So one of the things, if you want to throw in the chat, how does your school encourage students to apply for aid? And maybe one of the other questions is with COVID, how did you guys do it being in a remote situation when students had burnout? They had basically Zoom fatigue.
Good question, Janet. Thanks. I'll keep an eye on the chat for you.
I figured out how to pull it up there. I needed my third screen.
Hey, you go, girl. We're technical wizards here. Virtual open houses. Yep. Courtesy call reminders. Good. Courtesy emails. Emails. Yeah. I think a lot of us use emails. The thing there that we find on our campus is texting. Good. The thing that we find on our campus is everybody else in the world's emailing too. So it gets to be a competition on who's the student actually going to read, which is unfortunate. So, yeah, good. How, Katrina, how's the texting going for you? Good. You get a lot.
I mean, it's good sometimes because we can track to see like who's opening them and things like that. This is our first year doing all of our incoming freshman students, our applicants, their award letters via text. So they get an email and a text message to open it. We get way more students opening the text message than we do the emails. They open it and think that's the award letter.
I have my ladies, our work studies that work in our office that don't read their emails from financial aid. And I'm like, that's not good. So yeah, I end up texting them because they work in our office. But yes, yeah, great. Yeah, signage, digital signage is nice if you have the money for those kind of things on your campus. So that's really nice, Grace. Virtual campus tours, social media like website, good. So lots of different ways. Sitting on freshman, oh yeah, sitting in on freshman seminar. Yes, I was going to say, hey, we do that too, but that's Rochelle from my campus. So that's why we do it too. Good, yes.
I was
Great.
thinking one of the things we noticed when we went home remotely is we had to learn who people were very quickly. So being here for 16 years and knowing who people are on the phone but never seeing them, and then being home and they're in Zoom in my living room was kind of cool. So what we did is we got buy-in from our professors, residence life, and we made friends basically. We did a lot of outreach with on our campus because we found as they were trying to get messages out and our students had Zoom fatigue and weren't reading emails, and vice versa. So we kind of did was we switched who the sender was. So if it had something to do with residence life, they would put something in there and they would put a little paragraph about financial aid. Or if they, vice versa. So we partnered with them. And that actually seemed like it worked pretty well. So just because it was, I don't know, I guess it's like they think it's something else and then we got our message in there. So maybe if you can do something like that too, that we kind of stumbled on that one. So I can't say that we came up with a straight message, it just happened. So that might be something that we want to try. What consumer information does your school provide regarding application process, including filing the FAFSA and any other application materials? Does anybody want to throw anything in the chat about that? I think we talked kind of about the application process, but do you have any other materials that you request or? Same thing with the emails or texts or anything like that. You just kind of put the informations out. We try to do, we tried everything. We've done social media, we've done things on our website and things like that. And then I'm just going to kind of skip that one because we kind of did this. Do you guys have a deadline for submission of your FAFSA?
We say we do.
I don't know if you knew that, Melissa, but we got rid of ours.
Did you really?
Yeah, we had a recommended filing date. We wouldn't say it was a deadline. We'd say it was recommended filing date of March 1st. And it was more went along with January, but then when they backed it up in October, we realized that a lot of our SEOG was running out, things like that. So we now just really try to put the emphasis on October with the message, if it's past October, you can still apply. So that way we didn't scare them, but we kind of got away from, and we never said the word deadline. We would say recommended filing.
Yeah, we don't say deadline. We just say priority date, you know what I mean, to get the most comprehensive package. But yeah.
And we'll do the things too that we sent out, just kind of give you ideas. We did surveys with Qualtrics, and we would try to do this for cost of attendance and things like that. And one year we put the question, have you filed your FAFSA? Well, it was more information for us than we thought because we had about 50%, and it was after October 1. So we knew we had to jump in there and start sending some stuff out. So even if you do some surveys on campus, throw a question like that in there, and then you kind of know where you stand. Do I need to, put a better message out? And which format do you promote? Basically, is it FAFSA on the web, paper? You call in everybody's FAFSA information, which I think the last one's probably going to be 0.
Good.
So those are kind of things to think about on there. And I don't want to, like I said, I don't want to go over on here. So basically, that was it. That should be a thank you on there. And like I said, I can't say it more. This is a lot of information coming at you fast. So like when I said, don't try to write everything down because this whole time, because you're going to get so overwhelmed with, and you're going to get writer's cramp that you're going to miss some other things. Just try to sit back and absorb as much as you possibly can. And then we can, and the other thing is network, and document. Those are the 2 words we're going to say most in this entire presentation.
That's right.
So,
well, that was a really great job, Janet. And this gives us actually a couple minutes. Does anybody have any questions though that they want to ask at this point for Janet? Or, sometimes you have to marinate on things, and we can always ask things later. You can always email me if you have questions or anything. People have been doing a really good job about reaching out if they've had problems. We're trying to get all those folks taken care of in terms of getting access to the website for the information. So if anybody's still having problems on those, let me know. And then we have one more section today, but if nobody has any questions, we'll take a little bit of a quick break. We don't actually start on student eligibility till 11:45. So if you want to take, like 10 minutes, get back at 11:42 or so, that'd be great. Anybody